Before we start, I have some, there's a new Christian news magazine in town. For those who are listening, you have to go to christiannewsmagazine.com, christiannewsmagazine.com. Just grab one, pass it around. And then we have an event coming up. Whoever wants one. The kids are thinking, what is this? I've never heard of a magazine in my life. What? They actually do these things? So we also have an event on June 11th and an event on July 2nd. So how many people who know who Kayleigh McEnany is? Okay, well, she's going to be here July 2nd. And Dr. Simone Gold and Ali Beth Stuckey are all going to be here July 2nd. So if you are listening, go to vac.org to register. We have flyers, but I only have a few. I didn't. Okay, flyers. Yeah, here are flyers. We'll keep one in the back and pass the rest out. Again, all this is vac.org. We need to register because for the July 2nd, we need you to register right away. We already can't. There was supposed to be an event on July 11th, and we didn't get enough people, so we canceled it. So you guys have to register early. Just hand it out, whoever wants one. And if you got a magazine, we got lots more of those. Does anybody else want a magazine? Okay, because I got like 100 in my car. Yeah, it's not the same. Okay, let's start with now. Steve caught this. How many people caught something different about the way my questions are phrased? That you what? Oh, wait, you're my daughter. Anybody see? I referred to the United States as plural. It was what are the United States are the United States a democracy? Now you notice it used to be called. Always people used to talk about the United States as a plural until the Civil War. And then they started calling it as the singular, but it's wrong. It should be an R. It should never be a the. Okay, so if you want to start using that in your conversation, that's actually a good thing because these are the United States in the sense of there are states that are united. They are not one country. There are multiple states, right? And this is very important. The Constitution is written in that direction. So, and it was done for a specific reason. So we won't get into that reason today, but I just thought it's important to recognize that. And I think Steve caught it because I heard him talking about it. Okay, let's talk about, my first book was called Jesus is Involved in Politics. Why isn't your church? And so there is supposed to be another book coming out. If I ever get around to writing it, maybe now that I'm moving to Idaho, I'll have a bit more time. I doubt it. Although I'll have more time on planes flying back and forth. Yeah, but the title of the book is, if it ever comes out, is supposed to be God has a plan for government. Why don't you know it? Why doesn't your senator or your legislator or something like that? Because most of them don't know it, right? And it always cracks me up because I meet these politicians that are running for office, and I'll talk about what I talked about last week, about the rights and the goods. And as I said last week, I had a legislator who's, influential look at me like, I've never heard of that before. And I'm like, and you're making our laws. So today, how many of you have read or been told that our U.S. Constitution has no relation to the Bible and was based not on Christian principles, but on Greek principles? Ever hear that? I've heard that all the time. Oh, it came from the Greeks. It came from the Republic. It came from Plato, whatever. You can come up with all these different things. Now, there was some influence by the Greeks, but you have to remember the Greeks failed at a free government quite massively. So I'm going to show you evidence today that the Constitution that we have today was based specifically on the Bible. I'm going to tell you a number of stories. You have to move fast today because I got a lot of material. Because next week we may not have a class. We may just have a big potluck goodbye party. So we're going to invite everybody to come. So we'll see. And then we might do a Q&A at the end. But so I want to tell you a few stories, a few historical facts, and then tie it all together. The first story is about my daughters. As most of you know, I have two lovely daughters and one very cute, mischievous son. And if you know my daughter, you will know that I have ruined her completely. She used to love Disney princess movies. And she also likes talking about deep things. But she also despised Barack Obama. She completely despised him. I have no idea why. Now, it may be because I expressed my views. And I remember somewhere along the line I said, well, he's like a drug dealer. And I think I said, he's giving people free stuff to get them hooked on it. And then once they're dependent, then they have to keep voting for him, right? And I drew many analogies to that drug dealing. So at one point in my in the conversation, she wondered why he was a drug dealer. I had to explain that. But we had this one conversation where it went like this. It says, Mary Catherine, Dad, if you had 2 children in China, would they kill you? Me, no, I think they fined you a lot of money or something. Mary Catherine, why did they do that? Me, because they didn't want too many people. Mary Catherine, why? And remember, she's 6 or 7 at this point, right? Why is having too many people bad? Me, it's not really. The earth can hold a lot of people easily, but they were foolish and made a lot of mistakes because now the Chinese have too many boys. Mary Catherine, but what's wrong with too many boys? Me, because if there aren't enough women, men can't get married. Men need women to make them responsible and have families. And when too many men are not married, they get into roving gangs and do stupid things. Mary Catherine, oh, like taking drugs, drinking too much, and then voting for Obama. Yep, something like that. Now, it took a couple of years before I was able to convince him that he wasn't walking around handing out drugs to roving gangs, but Biden is. So remember, we will fund your drug habit. Okay. So, well, one day while Obama was still president, I made another big mistake. She asked me if the president was like a king. I said no. But then I said, well, Obama is acting like one. And she said, how? I said, well, he's collecting all the taxes from everyone and then giving it to his friends. That's what kings used to do, They would collect taxes from the common folk and then get the people like the dukes and the lords and the knights would then do the job of collecting more tax. And then they would say, look, I can collect more tax for you if you keep me in power, right? And then the king would say, yes, go collect more tax. And then they'd say, I'll give you this dukedom, or I'll give you this area of the land to collect tax from me. In fact, come to think of it, that's exactly what our Congress is doing, isn't it? Right? It says, hey, we can raise taxes, we can get more taxes from here. You just make sure that we get elected in the next election. They take our money and they give it to their cronies to help them stay in power. That's exactly what's happening today, right? I tell you, this is why we fought a revolution against England, to stop that. But this is where everything went haywire. Mary Catherine said, I thought kings were good. And I said, no, actually they're not. Because you have to ask, how do they get to be king? By exploiting the workers, by hanging on to outdated imperialist dogma, which perpetuates the economic and social differences of our society. Sorry, Monty Python quote, direct quote from this movie. Okay, I'm not necessarily endorsing the movie, but it is a funny movie. The point is that kings got to be kings by violence, in most cases, by killing people. I explained to her that most earthly kings gain and keep power through violence and oppression. And that's why Americans wanted to be free, and that's why our American founders fought a war and created the revolution. Human kings are just a bad idea. They're oppressors of freedom, of liberty, and of free people. Now, wait a minute. People might say, well, I thought you conservatives liked the ruling class. Strict rules that control people and more to the right. Right? In fact, this is their idea of what the spectrum is, right? We're here on the right, fascism, Nazism, right? The KKK. And then on the left is communism, socialism, and here's where the U.S. is, right in the middle, right? And all over here we have Antifa, all right? Now, In fact, some people put us Tea Party types. I was one of the Tea Party types. They put us all the way here, right next to the fascists. Conservatives, Republicans, conservatives, Tea Party, and fascists, right next to each other. And that's what they want. And this is progressive. It's a progressive creation, created specifically to taint minds and hearts and convert you and your children to their reality. But that is not what reality is. And today we're going to clarify for you so you can teach your kids and grandkids the truth. Okay. First of all, let me clarify the thing. Are we conservatives, or should we be really called conservatives? Because we're not really conservatives. We're what we call classical liberals. See, we used to be the liberals. We were called the classical liberals. We don't like kings. We want liberty. Christians used to be the liberals. For years, those who wanted the government to stay out of our business, stay out of our economy, and only be there to protect our rights were called liberals. We wanted more liberty. In fact, think about why the conservative Christian pilgrims came here. They wanted the government, the King of England, to leave them alone. And then 200 years later, why did the colonists fight against Britain? Again, they wanted the government to leave them alone. We're the ones that want minimal government interference, right? But the progressives wanted everyone to think that they were more liberal and free and permissible. After all, it sounds so much better. You know, conservatives were the people most people hated. They were the ones who wanted to conserve this or conserve that or conserve whatever it is. So what they started doing is they started rephrasing the words and started calling them liberals and us conservatives. I don't know if you know this, but back in the 80s when I first came here, we were the blue states. The conservatives were the blues. And the Democrats were the red because they were closest to socialism and communism. But then they decided they didn't like it and they started changing the colors on the maps. And now we're the red states. Right? So they want to capture the phraseology, the verbology, the verbiage, and they want to use it to their advantage. So, more freedom, more liberty. So now we call ourselves the classical liberals because this is what we were before. Classical liberalism. And there's so much writing on that, so look at that. Okay, but here's the question. Do us classical liberals really want a human king? Let me tell you the next story. It's about when the Jews wanted a king, and God said it was a bad idea, right? So that's where we are. So remember this part in 1 Samuel 8. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have." But when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel, so he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. As they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now, listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what this king who will reign over them will claim as his rights." Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, "This is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to be commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war, equipment for his chariots. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take a tenth of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants." And then he goes on, "He will take a tenth of your flocks, and of you yourself become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." But the people did what? They refused to listen to Samuel. "No," they said, "we want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and to fight our battles." And the Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Kings were bad. God had a better plan for government and for liberty. Most of us would call that plan that God had a theocracy. But it's not the theocracy that you think a theocracy is. And we'll get to that later. But the people seem to have a built-in desire to be controlled. Have you noticed that? People want to be led. They want to obey orders. They want strict rules and regulations. They want to be sheep. They want to be told what to do. So back to my daughter. Little did I realize that the 7-year-old would figure out what follows from that. You see, if kings have come to power illegitimately, and princesses are the daughter of kings, and princesses that means that princesses have come to their power illegitimately. Worse, if kings are oppressors, then princesses are what? Oppressors too. They're just continuing the oppression. So all to say, she doesn't like princesses. She's 15 now and already a lawyer. Now, so I determined at some point I got to stop having these conversations with my next daughter. At that time, she was 3. I said, I got to wait till she's at least 13. But that didn't work because my younger daughter would be watching a princess movie. And the older daughter, Mary Catherine, would walk in the room and say, and let's say in the movie, the king said something like, well, daughter, for the last many generations, our family has ruled this land in peace and love. And Mary Catherine would yell, yes, and how? By oppressing the masses, by taking power, and forcing everybody to pay taxes. I was doomed. And it didn't work, so Charlotte, anyway. But this is the problem, isn't it? Most kings come to power by violence and force. And nobody has the authority to say, you must treat me like a king, except for the one true king who created all mankind, right? Kings don't have that right. The only way they claim that right is by violence. And since kings don't have the authority to tell you to be their subject, they use violence and fear to subjugate you, and they keep you in line with threats of violence. And so this is what you have in a secular human monarchy. By the way, this is also a dictatorship or imperialism or despotism, right? Call it what you want. You have what type is dictatorship, monarchy. The type, it's a non-representative government. Nobody gets represented except for the king, right? Now, the supreme law, the king decides it. Who are the appointed judges? Decided by the king, the ruler. Lesser laws, decided by the ruler. Lesser laws are based on the whims of the ruler. Oh, I don't like this. I'm going to change the law on that. Moral laws. Oh, the only laws are my laws, right? Ceremonial laws decided by the ruler. Punishments. I'm going to punish this crime with this because I feel like it. Civil laws decided by the rulers. Public involvement, absolutely none. Right? And so this is what you have. But here's the thing. Monarchies cannot survive. They are very unstable because the king is going to have to look over his shoulder every few days to see who's going to be the next king. And if you ever go read the kings, first and second kings in the Bible, you'll see sometimes there were kings for like 7 days. Right, in Israel, and then the next king would kill him, and then the next guy would come in. And they were just like king after king after king. That was in Israel. But in Judah, at least it was always the son of David, because God had promised there would always be a child of David who was king there. So the king says, well, I can't do that. I can't survive, so I need to have people around me who will protect me. And so you never see a pure monarchy. You always see what we call an oligarchy. And what an oligarchy is a group of men or women in power who stabilize each other. So when Saddam Hussein was the dictator of Iraq, it was not just Saddam Hussein. He had a whole bunch of his generals, his dukes, his ministers, or whatever it is, right? And in the old days, it would be the knights, it would be the earls, it would be whoever. These are the guys that make sure the king is in power. So it's an oligarchy. So a monarchy doesn't last long. It's always going to end up in an oligarchy, right? Now, you'll notice it is the most stable form of government in many ways because the oligarchy will protect itself. Now, does that mean that we as classical liberals want to go to the other extreme? And the other extreme is what we would call anarchy. And anarchy means no government. It's completely unstable. Oh, by the way, in the oligarchy, we have the supreme laws decided by the elites. Who are the judges? The elites. Lesser laws decided by the elites. Everything's decided by the elites, right? And public involvement is none. The only people involved are the elites, right? So then you get the anarchy, where you have no government, you have none. And public involvement is individually. You fight yourself. Now, what's the problem with the anarchy? Imagine there's no government. It's easy if you try. Right? To quote the words of John Lennon. No, it isn't. Here's the problem. You end up with what? Somalia. In Somalia, you get warlords who take over. Now, what is a warlord? It's just an oligarchy. Because the warlord can't stay warlord unless he has his generals surrounding him. And so guess what? You end up with anarchies end up in oligarchies, monarchies end up in oligarchies. As I said, it's the most stable form of government. Okay, because when you have an anarchy, the warlord comes in and protects his own, and he says, if you don't listen to me, I'm going to kill you, so you better pay me taxes or pay me this or send me soldiers, and right? And then he creates the oligarchy out of that. Okay. So how do we have a stable government, a stable life protected from bad people, from bad actors, bad kings, bad dictators? Well, how about democracies and republics? Now, some people think that monarchies and oligarchies are the only situations where people don't have equal rights. But that would not be correct, because democracies, Greece had a democracy, right? They didn't have equal rights. Rome had a republic. They did not have equal rights there, right? So let's look at democracies. And now we're starting to see the real spectrum here, right? We're starting to see a spectrum here from a monarchy all the way to anarchy. So what's a pure democracy? A pure democracy is vote of the masses, right? Everybody gets a vote. Supreme law, vote of the masses. Who are the judges elected by the masses? Lesser laws, everything, all based on the masses. And public involvement is everybody gets to vote, right? So it's everybody is involved. Now, the problem with this is, look at the punishments. The punishments are decided by the ruler here, which is not good. Here it's decided by the elites, which is not good. Here it's decided by the masses. I mean, there was a case in San Francisco where a guy killed a dog and he got life imprisonment for it. Because the masses decided that was the punishment. Right? Yet at the same time, they let an illegal immigrant kill a young girl and get away for free. Masses decided that they were not going to go after that, right? Now, so what did the Founding Fathers think about democracy? This is one of the questions in the thing. Let's see what the Founding Fathers said. Alexander Hamilton, we're now following a republican form of government. Real liberty is not found in the extremes of democracy, but in moderate governments. If we incline too much to democracy, we shall soon shoot into what? A monarchy or some other form of dictatorship. And in his last days, in the last letter he ever wrote, he said, our real disease is democracy. Thomas Jefferson said, a democracy is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49. Benjamin Franklin supposedly said, democracy must be something more than two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for dinner. To which somebody added, liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. Right? Because if you got a gun, that changes everything. And John Adams, our second president, and actually the real driving force for the foundation of the United States was, remember, democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself. James Madison said, pure democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, having ever been incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths. So what did they call democracies? The Founding Fathers called democracies a mobocracy. And they hated them because they believed that democracy was just mob rule. Mob rule was subject to the whims of the masses, and it could be led by you could be led by a fanatic, crazy person. Remember this guy? Robespierre. If you've read anything with the French Revolution, there's Robespierre a few years after our revolution, where this insane Robespierre convinces the masses to effectively vote for them and guillotine/execute anyone he didn't like. He just got them into a frenzy, and they said, yeah, guillotine him. There was no objective morality. There was no fixed basis for the law. And the law was whatever the masses felt like it at the time. And what's funny is the Founding Fathers of America predicted that would happen to the French Revolution. Adams was like, this is crazy. This is what's going to happen. Jefferson, on the other hand, was like, hey, this is a great idea. Let's see where this goes. And Adams was like, are you crazy? This is going to end up in death. And it did. And then what happens with the French Revolution, right? Remember, it ends up in a monarchy or a empire. And who was the next person who took over the French? Napoleon. Emperor Napoleon takes over it, just like Hamilton noted, right? David Barton, a historian, says, democracy is a rule by majority feeling. What the founders described as a monarchy, a republic is a rule by law. So now we turn to a republic. Okay. Now, remember I said republics don't guarantee equal rights. Because you could have the Roman Republic, right? So first of all, a republic is based on rule of law. And in our case, it's the laws of nature. And second, it's founded on representative government, right? So, the first part, a republic is based on a fixed moral code that overrides all other laws, right? Now, of course, this brings us to the question, which moral code are we talking about, right? The republics of old, like Rome and Greece, fell apart. They were based on non-objective laws, man's laws, and man's laws take us back to the arbitrary nation. So the question we ask is, whose morality should we be legislating? Yours, mine, Hitler's, or Mother Teresa? And what did we say was the answer in this class? Whose objective moral laws should we be using? God's objective moral laws, right? And do you know how this is phrased in the Declaration of Independence? What is the claim to? Claim Jefferson writes is what? He says, the laws of nature and nature's God. So this is what our founding republic was based on. The laws of nature and nature's God. It's the unchanging laws. It's the unchanging moral law. It's the only one who has authority over anything. And if you don't have that authority, if you don't have that founding authority, then you don't have a real good system of government because you have an arbitrary system of government. Now, of course, people go, well, which God should we follow? And as I said, that's why I think apologetics is very important. You've got to show which God is the true God and what his laws are, right? So apologetics is very important because you have to be able to prove that. And no other religion can prove that God exists except for Christianity. And we've done that many times in this class. Okay. Now, it also turns out that the only holy book, or the only religion that says all men are created equal is what? Christianity, right? It says all are equal. We are created with unalienable rights. There's no Jew or Gentile, male or female, slave or freeman. All are equal in God's sight. Now, the Greeks had none of this, right? The Romans had none of this. Okay. Now, of course, we have to realize that the Americans, when they founded the Republic, they knew that there was a problem with slavery. And many founding fathers wrote about this and condemned it. They said this problem is going to come up later. And it did. It came up later. And it took 100 years and a bloody civil war for it to be resolved. Okay. So, based on this, remember, a republic not based on natural law and God's law would be worse than or equal to a democracy not based on natural law and God's law. So you don't get anywhere by going back to this. Okay, so let's look at this. First one was natural law. The second one was representative government, right? What is representative government? A representative government is, so a republic is based on representative government. This means that rather than voting en masse to create lesser laws, we have representatives who create those laws based on the conviction of their own consciences. See the difference? Now some of you go, wait a minute. So what is a republic? A republic is you elect someone to represent you and they vote or they make legislation based on that. And you go, why is that better? Well, we'll talk about why that's better. Here's why. Because the representative, the judgment of any law is based first, so any law is based first on what? The objective moral law of God. And then once you have the objective moral law of God, then there are things called lesser laws, right? Like when is fish fresh? When can you say this fish is fresh, right? When can you say this? Whatever it is, right? How fast should the speed limit be? These are the lesser laws, right? So those lesser laws should be based on, not on the whims of the masses, but on the conscience of the representative. Let me explain why this is true. Let's say, and this is American Revolution supporter, British politician Edmund Burke. Now, this guy was a British guy, and he was in Parliament when the Americans were looking for independence, and he says this. He says, your representative owes you not his industry only, not his work only, but his judgment. And he betrays you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. Let me explain what that is. And this is really important you get this because this is the source and foundation of our Republican government. One, there are two types of lawmakers. Do you want the Aaron type of lawmaker or do you want the Joshua and Caleb type of lawmaker? Let me give you an example. Remember, and this is our next story. Remember, Moses is up on the top of the mountain, right? He's at the top of the mountain, and God is giving him what? The 10 Commandments, right? Meanwhile, everybody down at the bottom of the mountain, all the Israelites are gathered there. They've just come out of Egypt. They're all gathered there, and they're waiting, and they decide to go to Aaron. And they go to Aaron and says, we're tired of waiting. We want to see God. Why don't you build us a what? A golden calf, a god, right? And Aaron says, I don't know. And they say, look, the majority of us think this is a good idea. You should obey us because that's what we want. This is an Aaron kind of leadership. Now, what happened as a result of the Aaron kind of leadership? Who died? Did Aaron die? No. But hundreds of thousands of, I don't know thousands, but hundreds of them, hundreds of the people below him died when God called them to account for it. Right? Moses comes in and he says, go in and basically reap the people who are worshiping this God. And hundreds of them come down. And Moses comes and it says, Aaron, why on earth did you do this? And Aaron said, well, the people wanted it. What he should have said to the people is, look, I know this is what you want, but my conscience says this is a bad idea. And you see that a few months later with Joshua and Caleb. They go into the promised land and they come out and everybody's afraid of all the people in the they're like, oh, they're like giants. But yeah, the food is great. The grapes are huge. But they're all afraid of the giants in the land. And they say, we should not go in. And Joshua and Caleb says, no. I don't care if all of you people, and they wanted to stone him. They're like, I don't care if all of you disagree with it. Lord has said us, our conscience says we should go into the land. That's the kind of leadership you want. Is a Joshua leadership says, my conscience, the buck stops here. If you do something that is stupid, it's my fault if I let you do it. That's a representative government. That's a Republican form of government. You see, today we have representatives who kowtow to the public. And they abdicate themselves from the responsibility. They say, oh yeah, well, the people wanted to burn down downtown for BLM. So we should let them. They need to be responsible for their conscience. And they should say, when I look at myself in the mirror, I think this is a bad idea. Now, of course, some of them are really evil people, and so they're okay with it. You're going to say? Right, he did.
What Joshua
and Caleb
conscience was based on what God
had told them originally. Yes, good point. Yeah, so it wasn't like they were thinking it through, but it was based on some facts. Yes, yeah, absolutely. But even if it hadn't, though, they were still supposed to take the leadership, right? And if our representatives don't have that moral conscience, they will lead our people to death and suffering. Okay. John Adams says, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That means we need a Republican form of government based on natural laws to protect us from bad people, to protect us from monarchs, from dictators, from despots, from oligarchs, from Democrats. Did I say that? I mean, from democracies. A republic is the only stable form of government, but it has one very large caveat, and I'm going to tell you what that is. Now, let me tell you what most people think of theocracy. Yes, Mike. Yeah, that's probably true. 90%. So, let's see what a theocracy is. I asked you during the discussion time, what is a theocracy? And if you look at the definition, it says theocracy is a system of government which priests rule in the name of God or a god. Right? Let me be clear. This is a man-made theocracy. Right? This is not a God-made theocracy. A man-made theocracy is where a bunch of power-hungry rabid priests, right? Man-ordained theocracy, but rabid priests control every aspect of your life. Modern-day misunderstandings and historical documentation say that a theocracy is what the Spanish Inquisition brought upon us, right? And they give us a good reason to fear a theocracy. I mean, no one wants a theocracy. Think about it. Non-representative, what type is it? Non-representative government. Supreme law is God's arbitrary laws, whatever those laws are. The priests decide what they are. Who are the judges? The priests are the judges. Less laws are made by the priests. Less laws based on God's laws that the priests decide on. Moral laws, God's laws. Ceremonial laws, God's laws. Punishments, God's laws. By the way, ceremonial laws are the kind of things that, when you meet the king, you're supposed to do this. When you go into a building, you're supposed to do these. These are all ceremonial type laws, okay? Punishments decided by the priests. Again, civil laws decided by the priests. Public involvement, absolutely not. And this is what a man-made theocracy is. I mean, if you think about it, this is what a theocracy is. A theocracy is a small group of elites who have all the power. They force us to tithe/donate to them. They know better than us how to take care of the poor. They know better how our businesses should run, how much we should pay our employees, who we should hire, whom we can fire. They're economic geniuses. They determine what we should believe, what we can or cannot say about our beliefs in public. They decide how our kids should be educated. They decide what we can or cannot eat, if we can smoke. And they are not supposed to be corrupt or greedy. They aren't supposed to give special privileges to their crony. Right? This is what a theocracy is. Now, you are looking something very familiar. You're like, wait, that looks very familiar. Yes, because that is exactly what we have in a status socialism. That is the progressive ideal. That is what they're trying to make America into. I've just shown you what a theocracy, and a theocracy is not what we classical liberals want. A theocracy is what the socialists want. Socialism, not social justice. Socialism is social oppression. Isn't it funny that progressives are so worried about a theocracy, but in actual fact, they just want their own version of it. And we conservatives have said we never want this kind of theocracy. So that first part is actually wrong. The second part is where we really should look at, and that's the theocracy is the Commonwealth of Israel from the time of Moses until the election of Saul as king. You see, where did the first original idea for the republic come from? It comes from the Bible. Exodus 18. Moses, if you understand the story, here's the next story. Moses has traveled out of the land of Egypt with all the people, and they're all asking him to be judge and tell him what to do here, tell him what to do there, tell him how to do this, tell him how to do that. And he says, look, I only have 613 laws from God. The rest we got to come up with separately. And by the way, I don't have time to judge all these cases. And so he's all frustrated, and his father-in-law, Jethro, who is a recent convert, comes to him and says, now listen to me. Let me give you some advice. Yes, Moses always looks like Charlton Heston. And he will forever. I'll be very disappointed when I meet the real Moses. I'm like, you don't look like Charlton Heston. So Jethro says, you should explain God's laws and teaching to the people, warn them not to break the laws, tell them the right way to live and what they should do, but you should also choose some of the people to be judges and leaders. Again, Exodus 18:21, you shall select from all the people competent men who reverently fear God, men of truth, those who hate dishonest gain. You shall place these over the people as leaders, officials of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens. Let these rulers judge the people. If there is a very important case, then they can come to you and let you decide what to do. In other words, you're the supreme judge, right? But they can decide the other cases themselves. In this way, these men will share your work with you, and it will be easier for you to lead the people. And now you see what a God-ordained theocracy is. What? It's a representative government. See that? Why? Because there's leaders over hundreds and tens and 50s and tens, right? Okay. But what's the supreme law? That's the objective laws of God, right? Who are the judges? Well, they were the elected judges, and then the Supreme Court judges were like Moses, right? That he had appointed. But in this, actually turns out at the end of, in Leviticus, the people get to elect their representatives. So we see how this becomes this is a representative government. Okay, the lesser laws are discovered by representatives. He says, we've given you 613 laws. All the other lesser laws, like when you should do this, when you should do that, we're going to let you guys decide at the lower level. And then they're discovered by the representatives, right? Because they're laws that exist, we just have to discover them. The lesser laws are based on what? The conscience of the representative, not on the masses. The moral laws are based on the objective laws of God. Ceremonial laws are God's law, and these are ceremonial laws in the Jewish time. Sorry, in the Israeli time, these were how you would worship in the temple, how you would wash your hands, how you would do all this stuff, right? Okay. And then the punishments were God's laws. The civil laws were God's law. And that civil laws are things like, okay, if you look at the Old Testament, you'll see that they say when you build a balcony, it has to have like a railing of a certain height. Today we have our own civil laws, and that is when you walk in that door has to be at least 6 feet 8 inches, and at least 2 feet has to be clear, right? So we see all those kinds of things, right? And the public involvement is leaders of 10, 50s, and 100s. You see that? That's what a real theocracy is. A God-ordained theocracy is a system of government that uses God's objective moral laws as the basis for all the laws and representatives, not priests. Okay? So, now you see this. This is Israel for 400 years, and they voluntarily gave it up in the passage we read earlier. Now, I want to ask you a question. Does this look familiar? How many people see this as something very familiar? In fact, there's only 3 things that might be different from what you recognize. Here is the U.S. Constitutional Republic. Type, representative government. Supreme law, the laws of nature and nature's God. Exactly the same. They're elected judges, and then we have an appointed Supreme Court. We elect our judges, and the Supreme Court is appointed. The lesser laws are discovered by the representatives. The lesser laws are based on the conscience of the representatives. The moral laws are the laws of nature and nature's God, the objective laws of God. Here's where they differ. Ceremonial laws, we have none, or we do. We have created ones, right? You know, when a soldier is buried, we have these ceremonial laws that go. When you meet the president, you have these ceremonial laws, right? But there are punishments legislated by the representatives, which is fine. Civil laws discovered by the representatives, you know, the 6 foot 8 inches, right? Things like that. And then public involvement. What should this be? And now you see that the U.S. Constitutional Republic is actually based on how God told us to legislate and govern the nation. Right? This didn't come from the Greeks. It didn't come from the Romans. I'm sure there was some influence there. The idea for the republic did not first come from Greece, nor from Plato, nor from Phoenicia in the 11th century. It is very clearly documented as coming from Moses and Jethro in the 15th century BC. That's hundreds of years before any other documented republic. It is ridiculous for someone to say that the republic did not come from the Bible. This is the original theocracy. Mike. But later on, you'll see when you go to Leviticus, they elect. So he appoints the top leadership, and then they elect. In fact, that's what happened in Jesus' day. That's why they had the Sanhedrin. Yeah. So the difference is, in the U.S. Constitution, what is the supreme law of the land? But what's the Constitution based on? The laws of nature and nature's God. In their case, they had a Torah that was their constitution. Laws of nature, nature's God, Torah. 613 laws. Almost identical, right? They use the Torah, we use the Constitution. So, now, but this all falls apart. 400 years later, what do we have? They're like, oh, we want a king. Why did it fall apart? Here's why it fell apart. Let's go back to this verse. You should explain God's laws. This is Jethro talking, and teaching to the people. Warn them not to break the laws. Tell them the right way to live and what they should do. But you should also choose some of the people to be judges and leaders. For 400 years, this is what the children of Israel had. And then it falls apart. And we see this. Remember, we just read this at the beginning. It says, some of the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, you are old, and your sons what? Do not follow your way. What was Samuel supposed to do? He was supposed to what? Train his children. Tell them warn them not to break the laws. Explain God's laws to them. Tell them the right way to live and what they should do. And you should choose good men. He chose his sons. And this is funny that Samuel does it because he was the one who told Eli before him that your sons are evil. And Eli's sons died that day, and Eli dies that day too. Here's the problem. When we get to this point, the leaders of Israel had stopped teaching the children of Israel the basis for their system of government. The priests had stopped explaining it, the teachers had stopped explaining, the parents had stopped explaining it, and the nation had stopped explaining it. Nobody knew the whats, or worse, nobody knew the whys of the laws. Even Samuel, as godly as a priest that he was, he failed to do so. And the Bible says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And when the king comes in, the whole system of government, this representative system of government, falls apart. And that's why it fell apart. The system of government will only work if people who understand God's law and teach them to their kids. It only works with a moral people who are obedient to God. Now tell me how much trouble our republic is in. You know the story. Next story. After the Constitutional Convention was concluded in 1787, this lady walks up to Franklin and says, "Well, doctor, what have you given us?" And what does he say? "A republic, if you can keep it." Can we keep it? But now you see why our representatives need to be strong, principled men and women of moral convictions, unswayable by feelings and emotions, not swayed by the masses, leading, not following, not leading from behind. So that means Christians and pastors need to do more than vote. Why am I spending so much time on these history and civics lessons? Because many Christians think it's enough to vote. It's not enough to vote. Today was voting day. Hopefully you all who could vote, voted. I know, and all your dead ancestors voted too, probably. Twice. When we vote, we're not voting in laws. We're voting in people, right? We're voting in men and women who will turn right our laws. And that means the men and women we vote had better be moral, good conscience, good moral conscience, godly conscience. They need to understand what they're voting for. But our lawmakers won't have godly consciences unless they are godly people. And won't be godly people making those decisions unless godly people run for office. What does that mean? That means you need to know the character of the person you're voting for, and you need to be one of the people that are running for office. And that's why we're telling people, look, you can run for school board, start water board. It doesn't matter, right? Samuel Adams said this: "Now the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of the people whose manners are universally corrupt. He therefore is the truest friend of the liberty of his country, who tries the most to promote its virtue, and who will not suffer a man to be chosen into any office or power, and trust who is not a wise and virtuous man." So, we cannot survive our republic. It will end up like the ancient Israeli republic, right? What happened to them? 400 years, and then boom. Well, at least we might have another, 150 years? We'll be lucky if we do, right? So, if you want to keep America free, here's what you got to do. You got to run for office. I'm talking about things like school boards. Even if you have no kids, you can run for office, right? If you're 18, you can run for office. Run for school board. I think 18 is the age for school board. You don't have to have kids. You can even be in private school or homeschool your whole life. It doesn't matter. I always say, one of my ideas is that you should also run for office as the most extreme person possible. So let's say there's a guy running for school board who's a good guy, and then there's a slightly left-wing person. You should take the most left-wing position ever and run for office so you can dilute the vote. So it's a good thing to do. When people ask you what you want, communism, Marxism. If you don't vote for me, you're not a Democrat. Okay, help someone else run for office through funding. I have to tell you a funny story. So the Republicans always lose out on these things, right? So there's this Democrat and Republican senator. They're going from, this is back in the days when you had the cabs in D.C. They land at Ronald Reagan Airport, and they're taking a cab into the Capitol, and the Republican says, let me show you how to get a new Republican voter. So he gets in the cab, and the fare is like $20, and he gives the guy another $20. He says, "Vote Republican." And the Democrat laughs at him. He says, "You don't know anything. I'll show you on the way back how to get somebody to vote Democrat," right? So on the way back, they go back to the cab together, and they get in the cab, And he says, I'll take this one. So they get to the end of to the airport, and the guy gets out, the Democrat gets out, and he gives it's a $20 bill. He gives the guy $1. He says, vote Republican. So help someone else run for office through funding, direct involvement, or by providing them the needed exposure. Some of you will get that in about 5 minutes. Okay. Open your home to local school board candidates and politicians, inviting your friends over to meet them. Get involved. Teach the law and the reasons behind it. Teach other people how to vote morally and biblical. Teach your kids how these things. Remember what happened to Israel, right? And that is probably the most important thing. You've got to teach our kids all these things. We're going to wrap up here.
They can also buy your book.
Yeah, they could also buy my book. Thank you, yes. Actually, Robin asked if you could buy the book in bulk. I hadn't thought about this. But yeah, if you go to our website, which is jesusisinvolvedinpolitics.com, you can buy multiples of them. But let me assure you, the best way to get someone to read it is not to just give them a book. The best way to get somebody to read it is to go to lunch with them and quote from the book and say, this crazy Indian guy said this. What do you think about it? And that's why I tell people, they're like, I'll buy a book for your pastor. I'm like, your pastor's never going to read it. But take him out to dinner, lunch, and say, I was reading this book by this crazy guy named Neil Mohammed, and he says this about pastors. What do you think about that? And the pastor said, well, I don't agree with that. Well, he says this, and just keep reading, and then give him another passage. Just write all these down, and then soon the pastor will go, well, let me see that, right? And then you'll get him to read it. Okay. Be involved in guiding politicians who are in office using others. Vote. This is the minimum. As we've shown, it's certainly not enough. Get involved in election integrity and watching those ballots being counted. Come to the VAC. In fact, come on July 11th, right? And come to Liberty Fest on June 11th. June 11th, this Saturday at 6 p.m. It's free. Just show up at the Calvary Chapel. But go to vac.org, register if you want. And Steve Kirsch is the inventor of the optical mouse. You use an optical mouse every day. He invented it. He's our speaker. Okay? So if you use a mouse, Steve Kirsch is in your life. He's our speaker, and he's going to talk about some really, really surprising evidence. Okay? I thought I knew it all, and then he sent me his slides, and I'm like, first I got like, wow, this is amazing. Then I got really angry. Then I got really frustrated. And so I'm somewhere in between all that now. But I'm not saying you'll leave frustrated. I'm just saying that you got to come find that information because you did not know that. Okay. And then the other one is go undercover. Get a job with the government counting those ballots. Don't tell them you're a classical liberal, right? And parents, you need to be teaching godly principles every night to your kids. All day. All night, yes. Why did I say all night? Okay. Folks, if men were angels, we need no government, right? If governments were angels, we need no elections. And if elections were safe, we need no election watchers. Now, yeah. Yes, it's a good book. Good set of. They're basically a bunch of articles. Actually, you should read both of them, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist ones, because they gives you good arguments, and they're both basically good things to know and read. Class. Hillsdale.org. Larry, you better give me some. You better send a donation this way. We're just promoting. Okay. Now look at this. U.S. Constitutional Republic Guard. What should this number be? Right? Remember, this was leaders of individual, none, individual in theory, individual, leaders of 10, 50, and 100. Right? What should that number be? Remember the passage in the Bible? It talks about, and this is Deuteronomy. Oops, I got to go backwards. Choose some men from each tribe who have wisdom. So I, Moses, took the wise and respected men you had selected from your tribes and appointed them to serve as judges of. See, respected men you had selected, that the people selected. This is the election process. And made them to serve as judges and officials over you. Some were responsible for 1,000 people, some for 100, some for 50, and some for 10. That means every 10 people had one appointed representative. That means, what should this number be? This number should be leaders of 10s, 50s, and 100s. That means that 1 in 10 people should be involved in politics. And yet you look at the church, and we don't have, we might have 1/3 of the people involved in politics, and 2/3 aren't involved in anything. I'm not involved in politics, just voting. That means involved in politics means they should be elected representatives, not just voting. Yes. So he will be on the November ballot. So will Dennis Delisle, and there's a bunch of people that we're going to tell you about. So make sure you vote for them if you're in that school district. Which school district do you know? Cambrian. Okay. So my question is, are you inoculating your kids from socialism? I want to wrap this up. What time is it? It is, wow, okay. Let's go back to this really quickly. Remember this picture? According to the progressives, we're right here next to the Nazis. But is that the line? Is this the line? No. This is the line, right? Dictatorship and then God-ordained theocracy, right? Man-Ordained theocracy now comes to the left of democracy, right? This is what the reality is. So where does fascism fit in this picture? So first of all, as many of you know, you guys remember these guys called the Antifa? They're supposed to be anti-fascists, right? They were supposed to be against fascism, and they were socialists and communists. And they identify as the extreme left. Some identify as anarchists, but as we know, anarchy is only a momentary stopping point before you end up in an oligarchy, right? So let me ask you this. If you want control over a nation, you use confusion and violence to reach anarchy, and then make sure you're the strongest one left, right? That's how you control a nation. Because you can't move them into monarchy. You first have to move them into anarchy. Once you have them in anarchy, then you can prove yourself to be the strongest guy. Good luck with that, by the way, because everybody else will be doing it. But here's the thing. They call us fascists. They say that there's right-wingers, there's classical liberals are fascists. But there's a problem with that. Here's the problem. Let's look at fascists in history. I don't know if I've mentioned this before in this class. I can't remember. But here's the thing about fascists. Have you noticed something about all the fascists in history? I'm going to give you a list of the greatest fascists in history. And you'll notice something very interesting, right? Hitler, one of the well-known fascists in history. Hitler was a socialist, right? Somebody says he was not a socialist. Well, he said he was a socialist. We are socialists. In fact, what does Nazi stand for? National Socialistic. Somebody says, well, it was national. That's why it was bad. I'm like, no, it was bad because it was a socialist, right? So Hitler was a socialist. How about this guy? You know who this guy is? Saddam Hussein. He was the Ba'ath Party socialist, right? How about this guy? You probably don't know him. He's Hafez al-Assad. I grew up knowing about this guy. He is also a Ba'ath Party socialist. And then there's Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is the Egyptian socialist. And he was a socialist, and he was also a dictator. And then, of course, if you remember this guy? Gaddafi. Yeah, he was also a dictator and a fascist and a socialist. And then Idi Amin was a fascist and a socialist. Some of you guys don't remember him because Uganda is now a Christian country because they took him back. And you know where the word fascist became popular was from this guy, Mussolini. Mussolini was a socialist. And then, of course, this guy, you know who this guy is, right? Caesar. Caesar was a socialist too, and he was the emperor. Now, why is it that all these fascists are also socialists? Because kings and dictators and dictators can't maintain power unless they promise the masses something, free stuff. Hitler could not have come to power without providing the masses free food, free facilities, and equality. He destroyed the existing unions only to replace them with unions loyal to him. Right? Kings and dictators can't exist unless they promise big money to big corporations. Right? Remember, the only reason Hitler was able to stay in power is because corporations like Bayer, Daimler, Volkswagen, IBM, Siemens, BMW, and even your coffee maker, Krupp, right, was promised lots and lots of cheap labor by Hitler. And that's why you had the concentration camps and you had all these labor camps. Because what? He was controlling the labor. He says, here, I'm going to give you free labor. You can make me all my weapons of war, and you will get billions and billions and billions of marks or whatever it was, whatever they were using at that time. So you see very clearly we are not right-wingers. In fact, we're not even on the same side of fascists. The only range is monarchy. Yeah. Well, the only range is monarchy on the side. So if you wanted to really, and I found a fascist and an Antifa member. I found a picture of an Antifa member catching a fascist. Because it's the same thing. They're both socialists. And this is what they want, right? They want their version of a theocracy. And what I call it is a demonocracy. So where does fascism fit? Fascism fits right here under the oligarchy. And where do we fit? We fit right here. So the story of mankind is a story of men trying to gain power over other men, to forcibly take the fruits of their toil from them. And there are only two things that can prevent governments from taking over freedom. One is Christianity, and the other is a deeply taught concept of liberty. We like to call it American exceptionalism. But in the end, the battle's always going to be between freedom and oppression, between godly principles and Satan's ideology, between principles and selfish, self-satisfying desires, between truth and lies. And there's only one way to save our republic. We have to teach our kids the laws like Moses instructed us to. Thank you very much. We went late, so let's do about 15 minutes of Q&A. Yes?
So, a few times you've mentioned
Careful.
progressives
Yes.
and progressivism, and I think that that's a widely misunderstood term. It sounds good.
It does, doesn't it? But it's regressivism, right?
Would you like to talk
Expand
about
on,
that?
yeah. So who was the first person who used, well, first famous person who used progressive?
Woodrow Wilson.
No.
Dewey?
No.
Crowley?
Teddy Roosevelt. A supposed
well,
Republican, right?
Okay.
He started the Progressive Party. The only reason Woodrow Wilson won, okay, so let me give you back a little bit. Let's go back to 1912, I think, election of 1912, right? Election of 1912, Teddy Roosevelt, a supposed Republican conservative, has been president for a while. Before that, I think 1908 or whatever. He then doesn't run again, and his vice president runs for election, wins the election really well, and then suddenly in 2012, and I may have the years wrong, but it's in 2012. No, sorry. 2012, we also had another progressive. So in 1912, we have Woodrow Wilson as a Democrat runs, but Teddy Roosevelt decides to run against his own vice president. And he creates a new party called the Progressive Party. Now, I'm not going to remember the numbers exactly, but even with the Progressive Party, Teddy Roosevelt gets something like, I don't know, like 30% of the vote, and the Republicans get 30% of the vote. And the Democrats get 33% of the vote. So who wins? Woodrow Wilson, one of the worst presidents we've ever had, wins in 1912, right? And most racist president. And guess what he brings in? He brings in two very bad laws. The first law is he takes the Senate from being elected by the states, appointed by the states, he changes into majority ruling. So a majority becomes just a representative. So in other words, everybody gets to vote for the senator. Before it was the governors of each state and the House of each state would appoint the senators. So that way they could stop the Senate, stop bad laws from going into things. We talked about this last week.
And Neil, because even today,
Hang on.
we have senators being elected in Georgia and in Maine and all around the country that are put in office by money sent from outside the state. So they attack this like it's a war.
They knew that, so they knew they were going in. And he was a communist too, by the way.
Yes.
Woodrow Wilson, Woodrow
So that's
Wilson.
how important this is, and that's why they should have never changed that. Because that's how the states protect themselves.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And they established the law where the Congress makes the law.
Yes.
And
and we talked, for those who weren't here last week, so basically the reason why only the legislator, the representatives are supposed to make law, because you get to elect them every 2 years.
Yes.
So you can kick them out every 2 years. The senators are every 6 years, and they are supposed to be there appointed by the state to protect the interests of the state.
They should never be in lawmaking. They should only be in establishing the law.
And stopping bad laws, basically. Right? So that was the intent of it. Okay, but there's a second thing that happened that is going to bother you and continue bothering you for the rest of your life, probably. What else happened? What else did they do? They passed another amendment, the income tax law, and they created the Federal Reserve. So did you know there was no income tax before 2013? I mean, sorry, 1913. A lot of people don't pay income tax. For 1913, there was no income tax. You're like, how did they live? We did quite fine, thank you very much. And it was because of the Federal Reserve that you had the Great Depression. It's that because of the Federal Reserve that you had all the crashes that we see over and over and over and over again, right? Because the Federal Reserve starts playing with the money supply, start doing things, and it's because of the Federal Reserve that we have inflation today. It's not because of Putin, in case you were wondering. Yes. Back there.
Economic boom and bust cycles that are destroying small
businesses, yeah.
And they're creating all this oligarchy of
big corporations.
businesses and better the government.
Yeah. And so one thing that we have to clarify, and a lot of people get this wrong, they look at these big corporations and they think, oh, this is capitalism. This is not capitalism. This is what we call crony capitalism, or a better name is crony corporatism. And crony corporatism can only exist because you need government power for a corporation to establish itself. And let me give you a bit of more background on it. And I said this before, once before. You can't have a monopoly without a government. People are like, oh, we need a government to protect. No. If you didn't have a government, you would never have a monopoly, right? You'd have an anarchy, which would end up in oligarchy, right? But what you need is a government that protects the rights of people. But instead what you do is you have these corporations that work with the government to gain power, and then they violate the rights of people. Now let me give an example, and this is an example that a very great person said, and unfortunately he passed away last year. Mike Winter told me the story, and this is kind of a rough translation of the story. He says, the reason why you have to have a monopoly for a government to exist is because otherwise the free market takes over. So imagine that you have 4 railway systems, right? The Northwest, East, South railways. And let's say that I run the South Railway, and my railroad is old and decrepit, and it's falling apart. So the cost of a ticket from going from New York to San Francisco is normally $100. But my railroad's falling apart. Nobody's coming to ride on my railroad because they're like, for $100, I can go on one of these nice ones. I can go on the North Railroad, right? And that's a great railroad. So they're all going there. I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut my prices. So I cut my prices to $85 a ticket. Now, all of a sudden, there's a price war. North, South, North and East and West are all fighting, and they're like, no, we should, and they're dropping their prices. Finally, they go, look, guys, we need to have a conference. They have a conference. And they say, look, guys, we're losing money. You've got to raise the price. Look, 85 is just too low. We can't handle 85. You've got to charge at least $96 or $99 a ticket, right? So they price fix. So they all price fix. They go, okay, great. So now the ticket price goes up to $99. But it doesn't help me. I'm still losing money because people are not riding at $85. At least people were riding on my thing. And it really doesn't cost me $85 because I got a decrepit railway system. So they come and they say, oh, well, so I drop my prices again. And now there's another price war. And this happens over and over and over again. And finally they say, this is not working. And so North goes to his father Kanye. No, I'm kidding. North goes to the government and says, some of the older people don't get that one. Okay, that's fine. So North goes to the government and says, look, we are losing money. I will make sure you get elected if you pass a law to protect me. But it can't be a law to protect North. It has to be a law to protect the people. All the laws come as laws to protect the people. And they say, we want you to have all these regulations that people have to go through, that railroads have to go through to make sure that they meet these qualities. And so they set up these quality standards, and guess what? Now they have a monopoly. Why? Because I am going to go out of business. You go, what about safety? Well, guess what? When they pass this law, they say, and by the way, if something happens to our railroads, you can't sue us because we're following the law that the government has set up. Like Pfizer. Great. Now I'm going to be off YouTube. Right? So they'll set up a law to protect them. So as long as they're following the government, they're like, you can't sue us because we follow the government. Government is the standard. But what really should happen is they should have their own standards. And when somebody does die, you should be able to sue them for the full amount. Right? So the government is protecting the rights of the individual, not creating the standards. And the reason I say this is quite simply this. Because remember, there was a big BP oil spill a few years ago, right? Well, the week before the oil spill, right, BP had a government worker come through and say everything was okay. Now, when everything blew apart and there was a big spill, do you think that government worker lost his job? No, he probably got a great retirement and was fine, right? And BP said, no, we follow the government regulations, so you can only sue us up to a certain amount, and BP protected its interests. What should have happened is they should have had private regulators, and when it failed, you get to sue not only BP for the full amount, you also get to sue the private regulator for the full amount. And the government steps in and says, sorry, we're going to enforce this ruling, you got to pay for it. And government steps in, protects the rights, and that's the role of government. You go, well, Neil, this can't work. It works every day. When you go to Walmart and you buy a hairdryer, that hairdryer can kill you, you know that, right? Why does Walmart not worry that the hairdryer is going to kill you? Because if you flip that hairdryer over, it says what? UL on it. Underwriter's Lab. I used to build monitors, right? TV monitors. In fact, if you ever buy a TV that says Dolby Vision, I designed the Dolby Vision hardware. Right? I was the only hardware engineer in the group, so I guess it made it easy for me to design it. But all of them that Dolby ever produced was designed by me, right? I had to give 3 of my now remember, these monitors cost $70,000 each to produce because they were like the best of the best, right? And I had to give 3 of them to the UL people who blew them up. They would short-circuit it, and it had to make sure it didn't catch a fire. Or they had these tests. They'd put something that was the size of a finger in, and we make sure it didn't short-circuit anything. It didn't kill anybody, right? And like, I got one of them back, I think. But why? Because that UL guy, he was so thorough. I'm like, this guy always like this? And they're like, yeah, get used to it, right? Why? Because if that UL guy releases a monitor that killed somebody, guess who loses his job? That guy loses his job. Guess who gets sued? UL gets sued. And Dolby gets sued, right? And the government steps in to make sure that happens. The government is not being crony capitalist at that point. And so that's the kind of system you want. Yes?
UL is a 100 private company, not a government agency. Yep. So when people ask,
come closer because the mic is...
Who's going to take care of people's safety? And here's the greatest company in North America and recognized all over the world that's been doing this. And
all the other countries do government versions of UL, right?
Yeah,
like
they're private. And Google to find out how many companies that started 100 years ago, they're still alive today.
Right. That's because they're very good, right? So these are the kind of things that you want. So you always want... So don't confuse crony corporatism with capitalism. Capitalism works. It's when you bring in the cronies in that you end up with what we're seeing today. And most of the time when we see things where we don't like this, we don't like that. Look, Amazon got this huge tax raise for going into New York, right? And Alexandra AOC was like, complaining about it. And we're like, look at all the jobs he brought. Yeah, now I have no problems with the government giving Amazon a tax break as long as they give every single other business a tax break too. Right? Why does Amazon get a tax break? Every small business should get the same tax break, right? Because that's crony corporatism in that sense. But if everybody got the tax break, we'd be okay. Mike, move up closer because...
All government inspectors from your city government, every single inspector, they are exempt from the laws. If they pass, it's not the inspector guy who inspected the BP.
Coming from an electrician, right?
If they inspect your job today and they pass it, and your house burns down tomorrow.
Nothing will happen, yeah. Let me repeat it for the mic. So what Mike is, who's a certified electrician, he says if the inspector who inspects his work does a lousy job of inspection, the house burns down, that inspector still gets his pension, he still has a job, he still gets to retire, and after he retires, they always retire and then they get another job getting both salaries, right? And you can't sue him either. Yeah. So these are the things that government should stay out of it completely. So that's what we want to do. That's what we want to see. That's where we should go. Okay, kind of went off topic there. Next question. We have 4 minutes.
Well, it's all good discussion. Really interesting. I didn't know a lot of this, but I wanted to add what that gentleman who's sitting right there who's going to run for.
Oh, Monty.
Yes.
So,
One example is like Stacey Abrams, who,
Dylan, can you come closer too, because this reach is there.
because I want us to stay on YouTube. Okay, is that better?
Can you pick? Are you picking him up? Like,
Is that better? Very little.
are we out of? Maybe we're low on batteries or something. Come closer. Either that, or we're running low on batteries. Yeah. You're still out. Come stand right here next to me. No. What? Okay, there we go.
okay, so Stacey Abrams claimed that she had the election. Anyway, so she So when Stacey Abrams ran for governor of Georgia, and thankfully she lost, even though she claimed she won. Anyway, so she didn't. She got all her campaign dollars, and many of them from California. And we were I was basically touching upon what he said earlier. So it is illegal, as far as it is illegal to, like, if you're running for federal office, to get foreign donations, right? Even though Hillary Clinton did it, of course. It's illegal for, like, say, if somebody donated from Canada or from...
Yeah, you can't donate from another country.
Yes, but can we make it illegal to donate state to state? If you want to run for office in Georgia, you got to get your campaign dollars from Georgia and not from San Francisco.
It's an interesting question. I have never thought about that. It's an interesting question, yeah.
Because I think that would guarantee every state...
It could, yeah. But there might be some downsides to it, but it's a good question. Mike, come here and... Yeah, that's true, and then they get money. There's always ways around it, because
I was thinking, would funnel it somehow.
But let me assure you of this: the way to defeat them is not to come up with all these new ways. The way to defeat them is to get all the churches to get out there and vote. Right? I mean, that really is the answer. Next question.
Should I fix the mic first?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Did Israel have an oligarchy? Did they ever become an oligarchy?
Well, Israel did. Israel became an oligarchy after the kings. But in a sense, the southern kingdom of Judea was... I mean, whenever you have a king, you pretty much have an oligarchy, right? I mean, even David had all his generals and all these people that protected him, right? The difference was the southern kingdom of Judah, or Judea, was protected by God. So the kings were appointed by God. In that sense, they're all going to be sons of Judah. So, any other question? Think of your question while she fixes the mic. I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Can I touch on progressivism?
Yes.
So it actually goes back.
Oh, okay, hang on. No, you're going to say something. I thought you were going to ask a question. Yeah. Once you get the mic up. I'll tell you guys a story while she figures out how to plug those in. I'm just kidding. I don't have a story in mind, but we can talk about something similar to that. Is it ready?
No.
Okay.
I have a story to tell. Tell them why the door is important, the door height.
Yeah. So my daughter wants me to tell you about. So I used to live in Yemen, right? Under Sharia law, under a theocracy, the man-made theocracy. And there was no civil engineering rules there or laws. So I'm 6'2", 6'3" in my shoes. The government thinks I'm 6'3" because when they measured me, I was wearing shoes. So my driver's license, I just noticed that my driver's license is 6'3". I'm like, wait. But so the average height in Yemen is 5'2". So the doors are like 6 foot tall. And I was forever hitting my head on every door. I'd walk through and I'd go, bang, because it's right here, right above my eye line, right? And so for the 6 years I was there, I had like red marks on my head the entire time. And so she was like, it's good to have a standard, right? 6'8". Although if you're a 7'2" person in America, you know, at least most people would have the standard. Yeah, go ahead.
Testing.
Okay, let's go.
All right.
So progressivism goes back to intellectuals in the late 1800s.
Yeah.
Woodrow Wilson was one of the principal ones, and there were other ones. One of the best known was Dewey, who created that system in the libraries, and he was involved with education.
So actually, I found out that's not the same guy.
Oh, that's not the same Dewey?
Yeah,
okay.
but it is Dewey who did. So Dewey he didn't do the Dewey Decimal, but I actually thought that too, and then somebody corrected me.
Oh, okay.
But Dewey was the guy who did the public school system, yes, and he was a progressive.
Anyway,
but that was 1930 something.
But anyway,
Franklin
Woodrow
School,
Wilson started out as an academic, and then he was the president of Princeton eventually.
Right.
But like, if you went back to papers he wrote probably in the 1870s or something, essentially he was undermining the principles of this country at that time.
Yeah,
I mean, he was basically saying that we should throw out the principles that are in the Declaration of Independence, and many of these other people as well.
Which is what they're saying today, right? So,
right. Yeah. It's just that it's worth studying what all those guys were kind of about.
I mean, if you go back, and that's the other thing, Curtis Bowers is coming on July 9th, and Curtis Bowers talks about this. Make sure you come to the VAC, July 9th. He talks about how the communists have always been very clear about what they want to do. In fact, if you go back to the Communist Manifesto, if you go back to all their writings, they're very clear. This is what we're going to do. First we're going after the family, then we're going after the schools, then we're going after the public institutions, then we're going after the economic system, and then we're going to start a race war, right? This is the agenda, right? So, and Curtis Bowers talks about that. In fact, you can get his weekly. How do you subscribe? A year, a month? A year. It's a month, I think. It's a month. $5 a month for his agenda weekly. What's the website? Yeah, we'll get it to you at some point. But just look up Curtis Bowers Agenda Weekly. So he did the two movies, Agenda 1 and Agenda 2, so in case you're wondering. Okay, we should wrap up. Any other questions? Last question. Going once? Oh, there we go. Ian.
In like the perfect theocracy or Christian theocracy, would there be freedom of religion?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And
freedom
there was
of worship?
Yeah, absolutely. And there wasn't in the ancient Israeli one, because that was a God-ordained country, right? But in our country, it was. And that's why if you look at our republic when it was founded, there was freedom of religion, right? Because most of these guys came from from oppression, like the Pilgrims and all that, came from oppression. Now, here's the thing, though. There's freedom of religion and freedom of worship. But we, at the same time, we want to be teaching the whole thing that keeps the republic and the theocracy, if you will, intact, is that you're teaching your kids. So it's not on coercion, it's on everybody knowing and understanding. And that's why you get to the point where a republic becomes more stable. But the problem is the republic is just as unstable as any other system if you don't teach your kids, right? Great questions, by the way. Well, we actually have too many people already, so no, we are packing. It starts at 9 and goes to 1. So if you're interested, come talk to us. We just need people to help pack. No moving heavy stuff. 9 a.m. Sorry. What night? Saturday morning at 9 a.m. Yeah. Yeah. So although I think we're already we did a general call. And I think we only need about 10 or 15. I think we have 15. So, but if you're still interested, some people won't wake up that early. So, come on out. Talk to me later. We'll give you an address. Yeah.
Just another reminder that we have books in the back.
Oh yeah.
CDs, all the cool stuff. If you want to see his works, and even me and my sister have some books back there. So totally check it out. For all the people watching on the live stream, thank you. Please like and share the stream, and make sure to check the description for links to the books and stuff. So yeah.
See, if I didn't have her, I'd have no marketing. Okay, let's pray and close. Dear Lord, thank you so much that you do have a plan for government. We pray that our nation will figure that out again. We did it once. We pray that you will allow us to teach our kids and allow our kids to be great influences in this nation. we do believe that there's a lot of potential for this nation because it is the most sending nation, the most giving nation, the most evangelistic nation. We pray that you will allow us to continue that for at least a few more generations, if not centuries. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. Thank you. See you guys next week. It'll be our last event.